Sonia is a teaching artist, activist, and poet. She is one of the founders of the organization called Long Island Together, a collective of activists working to make our communities more equitable, sustainable, and inclusive by challenging structural injustices in education, immigration, public safety, and language access. Sonia, as many of you know, is our social action coordinator, where she has been working with David Sprinson, advocating with members on public banking bill, police reform, voting rights, the West Bay Volunteer Corporation, and many other things. Sonia lives in my town, which is Port Washington, with her partner Raju, her son Kabira, and a lucky cat called Lucky. So welcome, Sonia. Please unmute yourself. I'm going to mute myself, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for that lovely introduction, Pat. Really happy to be here with all of you. A lot of familiar faces, and I was fortunate enough to actually meet some of you in person. Not all of you, though, but hopefully after this COVID pandemic is over, that will also happen. So Pat, I have two quick questions. One is, how you want me to speak for 25 minutes?
25 to 30 minutes is good.
Okay, all right.
And then after the meeting, if you can stay around for questions and answers.
Okay, sure. All righty, so I'm gonna try to keep this a little interactive. As you all know, I've been a teacher in the classroom, and I really like the Socratic method. I don't really like lecturing, but I'll do my best to speak. So I thought I would just get started. So as you know, the topic of this is one of the things that I've been working on, which is police reform in Long Island. But I thought I would tell you the story of how I got there. How does an Indian woman, second generation immigrant, get involved with something like police reform in Long Island, right? So David said, tell stories. So I'm gonna try to tell you a series of stories that'll give you a sense of my background, who I am, a little bit of political and immigration history, a little bit about my religious beliefs, and finally about police reform. So my story actually begins even before I was born, as it does, I think, for many of us, with the story of my father. My father grew up in India, in Amritsar, and he went to engineering college in Chandigarh in India as well. And he was very fond of not only coming to the United States, but he loved American music. And you know how they talk about push and pull factors in immigration? What are the things that push you out of a country, and what are the things that pull you to a country? So in the early 1970s, they were giving out green cards like hotcakes to South Asian immigrants who were highly skilled, engineers, doctors. It was much easier in those days to get a green card than it is today. And one of the reasons for that is that in 1965, thanks to the efforts of first John F. Kennedy and then Lyndon Johnson, and of course, the monumental civil rights movement, the quotas changed. Before 1965, it was very limited, the number of people who could, especially from India, come to this country. So in 1970, my father got a green card to come to the United States because he was an engineer. And one of the things that really compelled him also to come to the United States was chubby checkers, let's do the twist. Apparently when he was in engineering college, there was this picture of him in the college yearbook where he was standing on top of the cafeteria table, and he had these tight skinny pants on. Meanwhile, you know, he had his turban because he was a traditional Sikh, and he was doing the twist. And I didn't discover this until years later when I went to India, and my mom said, this is one of the first pictures I saw of your father before we got married. And I was like, wow, you look pretty handsome. So it's really interesting when you're an immigrant, the way you learn about your history, because your extended family is not always with you. So you kind of learn it in these bits and pieces. So what I thought I would do is, so I'm just curious, how many of you have heard the song, Let's Do the Twist? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, great. Well, now what I'm gonna do is this. You know me, right? I like everybody to move around a little bit because I don't want you to get lazy and fall asleep while I'm speaking. So I'm gonna play the song and I want everybody to get up and I want us to do the twist. And if anybody has any tips, I would love to hear them from you. So I'm just gonna pull it out 1 second and I'm gonna play it for us. Give me a minute here.
Here is Chubby Checker, the inventor of the twist. Let's have a wonderful hand for him.
Can you hear that? I'm going to share the screen.
Come on, everybody. Clap your hands. Oh, look at
Can everybody get up?
I'm going to sing that song. It won't take long.
Right.
Gonna be a twist, and it goes like this.
So I thought I would give you a little taste of some of the push and pull factors of immigration, right? So you kind of hear the typical story of great opportunity in the United States and, sometimes leaving war or famine or, now we're going to be getting a lot of Afghani immigrants, right? So it's kind of interesting, all the different factors that are involved in making these decisions. And I really do think, in retrospect, when I look at my father's story, that American music was one of the things that compelled him to come here. And it's not a coincidence, I think, in some ways, that Chubby Checker's Black man, who must have been impacted as well by the civil rights movement, was one of the reasons for my father to come here. And that it was the civil rights movement as well that allowed people and families like us to be able to come. And I don't think that Asian Americans or South Asian Americans always make that connection. And it's only recently that I've been making those kinds of connections in my own history and my own migration, that a lot of our struggles are so interconnected, right? And that's when I think about the movement of intersectionality. How many of you have actually heard of that term, intersectionality? Okay, great. Does anybody want to give a definition? So intersectionality was actually coined by this woman. Her name was Kimberly Crenshaw Williams, one of the women who was behind the critical race studies. And so she says that so many different things affect the way we have power or we don't have power. It could be gender, right? It could be race, it could be disability. And all of those things either give us privilege or they oppress us because of the way society perceives us. So I really feel that, a lot of the sort of the seeds of activism in me were planted by, in some ways, this notion of intersectionality, right? As well as my father's immigration story, and the reasons why he was able to come to this country. So the funny thing is, well, not the funny thing, but the scary thing is that, as many of you know, the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. The Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965. And what just happened to the Voting Rights Act just a few years ago? Anybody? The Supreme Court basically took away the power of the Voting Rights Act, right? And one of the things that we've been talking about at the Ethical Society is, how do we save our democracy from danger, from peril? These movements took incredible, monumental efforts, right, to make changes in our society so that we would be all truly equal to one another. This idea of the city on a hill, right, is this ideal that we've been striving to achieve for so long. We're still not there, in my opinion. And now we're yet again on the brink of losing our democracy. And this is something that, thanks to the efforts of folks like David Sprinson and Pat Spencer and all of you, right, that we are now thinking about what do we do as a community to make sure that we can continue to have access to voting rights, despite the fact that some of these things have been overturned. So I hope some of you, so we did create something called the Social Action Committee, and within that there's a subcommittee called Save Our Democracy. So we're really trying to see ways in which we can keep our democracy from failing. So I just thought I would weave that in to my story, because so much of the work that I'm doing is also, I think, woven into the work that we all do as ethical humanists. So let's see. The other thing I also wanted to talk a little bit about, before I talk explicitly about the police reform work that we've been doing, is I think the other ways in which the other way in which my activism and my work has been informed is through my lens as a Sikh woman. So Sikhism is a religion that was founded, well, it took many years, but basically it started with the birth of Guru Nanak. And Guru Nanak was basically, he was a Hindu. He was born as a Hindu, and I don't think he realized that he was the founder of a religion, kind of the way Jesus never conceived of himself as being the founder of a religion. But he was this man who was a mystic poet. He loved traveling from place to place and hanging out with other poets and saints and fakirs, and traveling from place to place because he loved talking to people about spiritual things. And so one of the things that I wanted us to be able to think about is this notion of praise, which I think Ginger was talking about at the beginning of our meeting today. And one of the things that we say in the Gurudwara, which is our house of worship, and by the way, we have 3 Gurudwaras in Long Island. There's one in Plainview, there's one in Hicksville, and there's one in Glen Cove. And maybe after this COVID pandemic is over, maybe I can take you all on a field trip. They serve free vegetarian food. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what langar is. Langar is this idea of a free kitchen. And Guru Nanak was a very radical man. He basically created this idea of a free kitchen where Brahmins and Dalits, or untouchables, could break bread together, could eat roti, sabzi, dal together, which was a very radical idea for his time. It was the idea that somebody from a very high level of society to the lowest level of society could eat together. Because in India, the caste system is very powerful to this day. But unfortunately, it's created a lot of inequity, the way we have inequities here in the United States. So the Sikhs, traditionally, we do not believe in caste. We do not believe in that. In fact, if you take the name of Singh or Kaur, that means that you are a Sikh. It actually means male or female lion. And it is supposed to take away your caste identity. So whenever you become a Sikh, you give away your caste. It's kind of like almost like how Malcolm X took on X, right? It was this idea that I'm not gonna inherit my slave name. So he took on X. So this idea of, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here, but one of our mantras is Vahe Guru. And Vaheguru means wow. It means wow, my teacher. And anytime we see something praiseworthy in our world, right? Whether it's in nature, whether it's something that we see in our lives, we are supposed to be inspired by this sense of awe. So I want everybody to take a minute, and I want you to think about, because I feel like in some ways this is also part of the ethical humanist, this idea of praise and taking time to reflect. And think about something that you recently felt awestruck by. I'll give you an example. So I've been writing a lot of poetry recently about the rewilding movement that my husband has started here in Long Island, where he's transforming lawns into these native wildflower meadows. And I've been noticing we have a lot of bees and butterflies in our meadow. And I just wanted to, I was writing a poem that had bees in it, and I started just researching bees. And I discovered that they, you know, when they store their pollen, they actually carry them in saddlebags. And one day I was out there, so I was reading about this, and one day I was out in the meadow, and I had the bravery of going really close to see what a bumblebee looked like or a honeybee looked like. And I could see the saddlebags. They looked like two little pieces of brown sugar on each side of the bee. And I was like, wow, Vaheguru. So anyway, an idea like that is something that that we try to instill in our everyday practice, is this sense of praise. And it's funny because now when you start reading those self-help articles about how to live a longer, happier life, everybody's like, learn how to be thankful, learn how to praise, right? And these are old teachings that are still alive today. So going back to Sikhism, I'm going to show you a few pictures to give you a sense. So the Sikhs are often recognized by their long unshorn hair. The men will wear turbans and beards. In fact, many of our men were mistaken for being Muslim terrorists after 9/11, and many of them were harassed, threatened, and killed. In India, the turban is supposed to be sort of a way to distinguish that this is a Sikh, not a Hindu or a Muslim. And our men are often actually recruited into battle, into war. That was something that was, I think, really inspired by our 10th Guru, Guru Gobind Singh Ji. The idea that you can believe in pacifism, right? Which is a real Hindu tradition, right? This idea of nonviolence, which a lot of you may be familiar as a result of the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. But Guru Gobind Singh Ji felt that nobody should oppress me with violence, that I have a right to fight back. So that strain of militancy comes from our 10th Guru, Guru Gobind Singh Ji. So we may believe in pacifism, but we also believe in the right to be able to defend ourselves. So you'll see a lot of Sikhs in the Indian military. So I'm just gonna pull out some images so you can see what Sikhs look like. So I'm going to share with you a website from the Sikh Coalition, which is actually a nonprofit here in the United States that advocates for Sikhs. So what I'm showing you is just like images of old people, young people, men, women, men who wear turbans, women who have long hair, the young boy who's wearing a patka. So before you become a man, you wear the patka. Just some images of Sikhs. Okay, so you can see that, you can see sort of the resemblance perhaps to a lot of people would mistakenly, you know, harass or threaten Sikh men after 9/11 and call them Osama. So you see the resemblance, right? Because Osama bin Laden also wore a turban. And Afghani culture is actually not that different from some Indian and Pakistani culture. We are very close to one another. But our belief systems are very different. Afghani Muslims have a very different belief system than the Sikhs do, for instance. But that's just to show you a little bit about the ignorance of some Americans. So the Sikhs. So one of the sort of oh, and let me show you one other image of the Golden Temple in Amritsar. This is one of our holy sites. All right, let's see. Pat, how am I doing on time? How much time do I have?
10 to 15 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So this is the Golden Temple in Amritsar. It's surrounded by a sarovar, which is supposed to be this artificial lake, and it's supposed to, you know, people actually bathe there and think that their illness will go away. So we have a lot of these kinds of kind of beliefs as well, that visiting a pilgrimage site is gonna cleanse you in a certain way. So let me just wanted to share some images. So yeah, there are I feel like there are a lot of people who don't know much about the Sikhs. So I think it would be fabulous for us to maybe do a field trip to a Gurudwara in Long Island. And like I said, it's about people sharing food together from all different parts of the community, and sharing kind of that original radical vision that even though we come from different parts of the community, we can sit and we can eat together. So with Sikhism, I feel like it really informed a lot of my activism, in that we really believe in the equality of all men and women. We believe in social justice. So a lot of that has informed the way that I also perceive my activism. There's this sense that we will do service also to the community. It's called seva. So in fact, when you go to the Gurudwara, one of the things that they ask everybody to do is you get this free meal, right? But somebody actually donates the money for the food. Somebody comes and brings the food. And then there's usually a whole community that comes, they cut the vegetables together, they make the chapatis and the rotis together. So that notion of service is embedded in our philosophy. So that's a little bit, just a little bit. I just give you a itty bitty bit about Sikhism. And the word Sikh means to learn, to be a disciple, to constantly be on this journey of learning, and to also in some ways continue to praise, right? That idea of the Vaheguru. So that's a little bit about Sikhism. And before I move on, does anybody have any questions about Sikhism? Because I know that this might be a relatively new. Anybody have any questions about Sikhism? And by the way, there's a great book. There's several really good books, but one that I read recently is actually by a young Muslim man called Harun Khalid, who talks about the travels of Guru Nanak. There are all these stories about Guru Nanak traveling throughout India, Pakistan, even all the way to Mecca. He made the Hajj, by the way, according to the hagiography, so we don't have the exact details of his life. We have these kind of stories that have been passed down from generation to generation, so we don't know how accurate they are. But one of the stories is that he went to Mecca and he actually lay down and he placed his feet toward the Kaaba. The Kaaba is the central place in the middle of Mecca, and it's supposed to be a very holy site, right, for Muslims. And the story is that he was trying to make a point. He had his feet exactly pointed toward the Kaaba in the middle. And everybody was so upset. So the reason he did that is that he wanted to basically break the idea of ritualism and tradition. And he said, look, God is everywhere. So no matter where I point my feet, I'm going to be pointing to God. Because actually, if you go to a temple, in a Hindu temple, or if you go to a Gurdwara, you're not allowed to wear shoes, and you're not allowed to point your feet toward any image of God. So just, some stories and some things that I can share with you. I'm definitely not going to be very comprehensive in terms of what I can teach you about Sikhism in 15 minutes.
Lynn has a hand raised.
Yeah, Sonia.
Yes.
Some of us here went to the retreat house in Glen Cove
Oh,
because it's right near the place where we used to have our women's retreat. And I know a group went over there, and that we were really welcomed when we were there.
lovely. Yeah, that's great. So one of the things we have actually every year is something called the Vaisakhi Mela, which is supposed to celebrate the spring festival. And that's usually outdoors. So I would love to take you all there again. And again, the food is free, it's vegetarian, and it's so delicious. But I'm glad that you guys had a chance to check it out. Alrighty, so now the segue into police reform. So I wanted to give you a sense of a little bit about our immigration story, my belief system as a Sikh, and to kind of show you how that's informed my work as an educator, as an activist. So I didn't get directly involved with police reform. 4 years ago, when Trump was, wait a second, not 4 years ago. How many years has it been? 5.5 to 6 years ago, when Trump was elected, my husband and I decided to start community activism here in Port Washington. We had been activists on and off in our lives. In fact, we met in New York City, and we had organized an activist camp for South Asian youth who are college going students. So we were like, okay, it's time again to make sure that the people who are most vulnerable in our community, that we are able to advocate for them. And at that time, as you know, immigrants were under attack. So we basically organized with our neighbors, with folks in Port Washington. We tried to keep it multi-generational, multiracial. And one of the first things that we did is we organized legal clinics for some of our immigrant neighbors so that they would know what their rights are. So that if ICE came to their door, they would know what to do. So that if one of them had TPS documentation, they would know what to do. So a lot of the work that we did just in terms of organizing our immigrant neighbors, one thing kind of led to another. And this kind of brings me back to the idea of intersectionality and how one struggle and one oppression can bring us to understand so many other things. So because we were working with the immigrant community, particularly a lot of people from El Salvador, Colombia, Chile, Guatemala, not just Mexico, right? As we all know, because Trump would always talk about the Mexicans. But one of the things that we learned is that a lot of the immigrant families were like, okay, we know that Trump is here. We know how to deal with this. But the reason why we came to this country is so our kids would have access to opportunity. And so one of their biggest struggles was being able to give their kids the best opportunities in our school district. And so then that became yet another issue that we became involved in. And one of those issues was organizing around language access. When parents would call the school district, there would be no translator or interpreter. And by the way, there is a federal mandate that every school district give parents access to interpreters and translators. So it's one of those unfunded mandates. It's a mandate that is, the federal government says you must do this, but sometimes what happens is the school district may not have enough money to actually implement it properly. So that was another issue that we became involved in. And then I'm just going to jump right into, there were a lot of other issues that we got involved in, and Pat Spencer can even tell you a little bit about some of those issues. But, advocating on the behalf of immigrants via our school district, creating something for Spanish-speaking families called Padres en Acción was another thing that we helped launch, so that folks could organize on their own behalf, right? So that we would not speak on their behalf, but they would learn how to become activists themselves. And then I'm just gonna jump right ahead forward to the summer of, was it the summer of 2020? The summer of 2020, when George Floyd was murdered by police. The Black Lives Matter movement took off. And it was an interesting confluence of events, right? It was the pandemic. A lot of people were home. A lot of young people were unemployed, or they were looking for jobs, or they were home from college. And here there was all this pent up energy, and people rose up, organized, and they went into the streets, and many of them organized beautifully and peacefully, saying that this is wrong, that enough is enough. We're tired of hearing how young, middle-aged, older Black men and women are being murdered too often by the police. So Long Island Together decided that we needed to get involved. And I think it was right around that time that I also joined in my role as a social action coordinator with the Ethical Humanist Society. So there were many coalitions that were being formed in Long Island. And the one that we are now a part of, thanks to all of your efforts as well, is the Long Island United to Transform Policing and Community Safety. I'm gonna actually show you a link to their website so that you all have access to it. And what was incredible is that within 1 year, this particular coalition subdivided into various groups. I was in a group that focused on mental health crisis. There was another group that focused on traffic, right? Because think about it, when you hear about most of the encounters with the police and Black men and women, they often happen via traffic stops, right? So there was a group around mental health crisis, traffic stops, accountability and data. One of the people that was part of our coalition was Susan Goddard of New York Civil Liberties Union. And she foiled the Nassau County as well as the Suffolk County Police Departments. There is hardly any data that they could share with us regarding these traffic stops, regarding so many other issues that we had wanted information on. Because our goal as activists, right, is to see, okay, so let's just take a look at one particular issue, right? Like, let's look at how many police officers who are censured because of inappropriate behavior, how many of them leave the police force? How many of them are disciplined? We wanted that kind of data, and we were not getting that kind of data. One of the other things that was passed around this time was legislation that allowed us to be able to check the records of police officers so that they would be public. So that if there was a police officer who committed a crime, right, that we would be able to go and we would be able to know what exactly this person did and why are they still on the police force. So this particular coalition during COVID, when we were all in shutdown, over Zoom, organized like crazy. And within about 9 months, they were able to generate a research-backed, evidence-backed report called the People's Plan. And if you have not read the People's Plan, I would highly recommend it. It is not something that you would expect a lot of sort of, you know, anger, and you would expect a lot of, we need this change right now. But instead what it was researching models across the country that have been doing a better job than we are at intervening with or basically making reforms in public safety. So I'm going to share with you, give me a second, some links so that you have access to this as well. If anybody has any questions while I'm pulling this up, please feel
We can
free.
also, later on, we can also put them on the chat.
Oh, sure. Okay, great. 1 second. Pat, how much more time do I have? Okay, here we go.
Pat, you were muted. So I don't know if you answered Sonia's question or she heard you.
You should be finishing by now.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to show you a few pages on the LI United. Can everybody see that? Okay. All right. So they have a beautiful website. This was all done within the course of a year. And I think a lot of it, believe it or not, we organized all across Long Island. If we had to do this in person, I don't think we could have done it. So actually, in some ways, being able to organize by Zoom and dividing into these small subgroups really helped us accomplish some of our goals. Continue to the site. So one of the interesting things, right, that LI United was in some ways very different than some of the other police reform movements is they didn't use the defund language. They felt that the defund language was not going to be very constructive. So instead they used this other idea of divest from the policing and incarceration of our Black and Latino communities, transform policing by using more effective restorative justice cycle alternatives that stop the cycle of violence, and invest in our Black and Latino communities to promote genuine community safety, community control, and collective well-being. So they didn't say, let's get rid of the police. They said, let's change the system so that it is more helpful in terms of protecting the lives of people that it's supposed to protect, which is all of us, right? And then the other thing I'm going to quickly show you is this. This is the most important thing. What did we accomplish? All right. What we accomplished was this. These are the things that we accomplished. So we created an infrastructure, which I'm not going to get into the details of. But as a result of the People's Plan, we were able to do many things in Nassau as well as in Suffolk County. One of them is to expand the mental health response. As you all know, often police are even called when there's somebody who's having an episode and maybe they have autism, maybe they have schizophrenia. What we're saying is, don't have a police officer intervene, have a mental health clinician intervene, especially if it's non-violent episode. We're saying improve your data collection so we can see how much progress we've made. We're saying increase public safety community oversight get the public involved so they know what's going on. Improvements to the complaint process. And the other issue that I think we've made a lot of progress on is, let's see, where is it? The other thing they said that they would do is that they would codify that police personnel are going to treat gender expansive people as equals to straight folks, to straight cis folks. Because another one of our allies in the coalition was Julie Gray Owens, who is actually the head of an LGBTQ organization here in Long Island. So these are just a few of the things that we were able to accomplish. Now I am actually the co-chair of one of these subgroups. And I had no idea that if you had asked me 4 years ago, are you going to be involved in police reform? I'd be like, I have no idea. But it just kind of one thing led to another. And then I think in my work with the Ethical Society, that work multiplied. And so now I am actually the co-chair of the mental health work group. So our goal this year is to monitor and watchdog to make sure that they implement some of these changes. So I'm just going to stop right there, and I would love to take your questions, any questions that you have about any of the things that I talked about.